I don't even know how to start this one, to be honest. I really don't. I don't know how to start this one.
The Biodome, a pure, self-contained environment where 5 scientists are about to be sealed off from every conceivable form of contamination, except one.
Well, check out that mall, man.
Our dream is finally at hand.
What kind of mall is this?
Get them out of here!
The doors are sealed for 1 year.
We're stuck here.
That's right.
The whole world is watching as Bud and Doyle are separated from their loved ones. Learn about endangered species.
They're the rarest Lepidoptera in the world.
Experience nature firsthand. And become world-renowned protectors of the planet. Biodome.
I guess we could start with the title. That's a good place to start, I guess. Biodome. Biodome is a 1996 buddy comedy, and I would say that it was riding on the success of buddy comedies like Bill and Ted, but the thing is, from what I heard, it allegedly started off as a Bill and Ted sequel, and I'm assuming that if it was released as one, it would be called, like, I don't know, Bill and Ted Go Green, or Bill and Ted Save the Earth, or something like that. But no, they eventually decided to try and rework it into something else, and that's how we got the movie that we know today, known as Biodome. Bud and Doyle, played by Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin, get simultaneously dumped by their eco-conscious girlfriends, Monique and Jen, played by Joey Lauren Adams and Teresa Hill, in the middle of the desert. Needing a bathroom, the two friends enter what they think is a mall, but soon realize is a high-profile, secure biological experiment. As they engage in a year-long battle with Dr. Faulkner, played by William Atherton, and the other scientists, Bud and Doyle are forced to confront the recklessness of their behavior. 4.3 out of 10 on IMDb, 4% out of 100 on Rotten Tomatoes, and 1% out of 100 on Metacritic. Oh no! Big selling point of this movie is that it stars Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin, and I talked about Stephen Baldwin before when he played Barney Rubble in Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas, and while that movie wasn't very good, he actually was a decent Barney Rubble, but I mean, Stephen Baldwin, Alec Baldwin, the Baldwin family, while mildly talented, they're kind of just egotistical douchebags and wastes of space anyway. And as for Pauly Shore, he had a brief cameo as one of the adult film award hosts in Bucky Larson when I talked about that. And even though Pauly Shore doesn't have a very good track record in terms of movies, he was actually one of the few people to walk away with dignity after Bucky Larson. I actually didn't really know a whole lot about the legacy, the oeuvre of Pauly Shore, and from what I gather, he was basically just a regular host on MTV for a while, and eventually he worked that into a film career. The movie that pretty much launched him into having a career was Encino Man, which I will say, after all these years, while not a perfect movie, still very entertaining. And I mean, this is technically a voice acting role, but he was actually pretty funny in a goofy movie and an extremely goofy movie. Unlike what MediaWiz said when he talked about that Casper sequel, he said that Pauly Shore was in Chairman of the Board. That actually wasn't Pauly Shore, so yeah, whatever MediaWiz says is wrong. Needless to say, yeah, Pauly Shore ends up working his silly voices and his constant laughing at his own jokes. He works that into this movie as well. Another big thing that was huge in the 90s, around the time they were making this thing, was environmentalism. Specifically, the whole save the rainforest, save the trees, save the environment kind of thing. I feel like if they were to make this movie nowadays, it would be either about vegans or it would be about climate change, I guess. But from what I can tell, the Biodome itself was actually a real thing at some point. It was a real experiment that they tried. I don't think they ever finished it. I didn't really look into the actual logistics of that, but I guess someone sat there and thought, you know, it'd be funny. Let's try and do a comedy where you take two dumbass slacker dudes and you put them in a, you know, this facility with a bunch of scientists until eventually they crack and, you know, wacky shenanigans happen. In this case, the two main slackers are Bud and Doyle, and for some reason they're supposed to be college students, even though, from what I've heard, one of them was 26 at the time and the other was 29. So you got guys that look like they're in their 30s playing college students, go figure. And despite being dumb as a bag of hammers, they somehow have their own house and they have girlfriends. You know, I may have complained about the whole Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Seth Rogen man-child movies where despite being unlikable man-children, they somehow end up with like really hot wives or hot girlfriends. This movie right here, like the way these guys act, I cannot believe that. That's like Star Wars level suspension of disbelief. And one of the girlfriends is the blonde from Chasing Amy. She's in all the View Askew universe movies. The one that kind of sounds like Jennifer Tilly.
Don't you think your couch is having withdrawals?
Their girlfriends are all about environmentalism and they're all about going to places to try and pick up trash and all that kind of thing. And at first I was thinking, so is this their attempt at trying to make fun of stuff like that? Is that them trying to like say that people who are into this kind of thing, who act all self-righteous, but then are just really vapid and shallow about it? Like, I was wondering if that was supposed to be like satirical, but then I was like, no, this is Biodome. They probably weren't trying to do that deep of a thing. Bud and Doyle don't want to join them because, of course, they're slackers, but once they get down there, the girls call them up and say that they're trying to hook up with these surfer bros who aren't really there. It's just a cheap way to try and get them to go down there. So they speed on down there in their Jeep, and they have to use the bathroom. And, I mean, they're in the middle of a desert area. They could easily just pull over and piss on the side of the road. If they did that, then we wouldn't have a movie. So they notice the Biodome, which they spend the first 2 minutes of the movie setting up that it's this big experiment where people are going to be locked inside of this airtight facility with limited resources. They're going to have technology, entertainment, and they're going to have all these different, like, greenhouse areas where they can grow their own food and try to take care of the environment and see how long they could last and hopefully go for at least a year. They go inside the place thinking that it's a mall so they can use the bathroom, but they just happen to go in around the time they're about to lock the place up and cut it off from the rest of the world for the next year. But the guy running the whole thing goes to the press and is like, oh, well, this is part of the experiment. We're going to try and enforce some kind of chaos theory principle in there by putting these two bozos in there.
Pre-planned addition to Team Biodome is intended to simulate the chaos theory as we encounter it in nature.
As for the scientists, there's a couple of other characters, but the three main ones you gotta focus on are two attractive lady scientists who are kind of secondary love interests to these guys, I guess. And the main one is the main villain, and he's played by William Atherton, aka Walter Peck from Ghostbusters. And yeah, that was a real stretch, seeing him play an environmentalist scientist douchebag.
I'll tell you what's hazardous. You're facing federal prosecution for at least a half a dozen environmental violations.
And so for the rest of the movie, it pretty much just becomes a series of vignettes, seeing them go from one scene to the next, them annoying other people, them spouting out wacky banter between each other.
Biodegradable pineapple. Who's the master? Who's the king? Squirrel. Who's the shortest? Oh, you know, who's he? I'm so scared because I fall off my chair.
Also, this movie occasionally delves into like Family Guy style cutaway gags, because there's times where they'll be like, oh yeah, well that's like this one time, and then it cuts away and like there's one where it shows them as kids, and then there's one where they show them when they were going through like a stoner phase, and one's dressed up like Slash and the other one's dressed up like Tommy Chong.
Peanut butter and jelly with bacon, that's easy.
Oh, buddy, good call, man. Keep on cruising.
I really feel like I should have more to say, but no, that's kind of the whole movie. The whole movie is just these two guys being obnoxious to each other and annoying other people. But eventually, all the scientists, except for Walter Peck, all the scientists gradually start to like them, not because any kind of like resourcefulness, except for, unless you want to count the very end, which I'll get to that later. But for the most part, yeah, they just kind of hang around them. They're obnoxious. They try to, you know, make each other laugh. They try to say dumb jokes. They try to flirt with the other two lady scientists. And also this part happens. I don't even know what to say. Do you know what to say? I don't. For a second, I actually thought they were going to end up with the lady scientists because the girlfriends broke up with them, but then they established that the girls kind of feel bad because it was technically their fault that they went down there and got sidetracked and went into the biodome. But yeah, like the girlfriends dumped them at the beginning of the movie because they didn't want to help with some environmentalist cleanup thing. But then there's scenes where they occasionally cut back to them and they're worried about them. And, well, okay, there's one part near the end of the movie. Later on in the movie, they try to clean up their act. And at one point, the lady scientists try to have sex with them. And, I mean, they make out with them a bunch. But then eventually they control their urges and say that they have girlfriends and they want to wait for them. I guess is a way to kind of show character development, I guess.
Sorry, it's just I have girlfriends on the outside that don't stuff, but you are just fantastic.
Good night, Squirrely.
Here's the setup that leads to them changing their ways. So basically, the scientists, more specifically Walter Peck, get fed up with them. So what he decides to do is he puts them in this like desert area of the biodome and basically just cuts them off so that way they'll starve or die of dehydration or something. And of course, in this movie's logic, it turns out that one of the windows in this area has a lock and key, and they manage to escape this sealed tight area. I would have said, wow, that's really stupid, but I was like, considering the rest of the movie, I'm not even surprised they did that. They get out of the biodome and they decide to celebrate by inviting people and having this big party inside of the biodome. And so it cuts to the girlfriends. They're doing this yoga thing, which that was one of the many things they established earlier. They established that Pauly Shore is good at doing yoga, and you know he can do this because he's able to do all these different flexible stretches.
Do it like that. And sometimes I can lick my back too. What? And then when they throw it like that.
Yeah, the girlfriends are at this thing. They kind of flirt with these other two guys who are handing out flyers, and they're like, oh, there's this party going on at the biodome. And at first the girlfriends are like, huh, well, if things don't work out with our boyfriends, there's always those two guys. And of course, you know it's a setup for later where it turns out those guys are douche lords. And yeah, sure enough, you know, because at first they say they're all about environmentalism, and the girls really love that. And then eventually it turns out that they're just saying that so they can get some ass.
I thought you cared about the environment.
No, we just want to get laid. Hell, I'd strangle a dolphin and get into her pants.
So in this yoga scene where they're handing out the flyers, Jack Black and Kyle Gass from Tenacious D show up.
Don't say we didn't save some freaking trees!
I would love to know what Media Wiz thinks about that scene, because I know he loves Tenacious D. It's like one of his favorite bands. I would love to see him freak out, just the fact that Tenacious D are in fucking Biodome. Everybody goes to this party at the Biodome, and their girlfriends are pissed off because they pretty much went against what exactly the Biodome was supposed to do, because guess what? People end up trashing the whole thing, and the next morning, the girls are cleaning up the trash, and they give this speech to the boys that they need to clean up their act. And so that's what motivates them to try and, you know, right their wrongs and take responsibility. So around the time that they're about to open up the Biodome, after a year of all of this, Walter Peck basically goes insane, and he builds coconut bombs as a way to try and kill them. Of course, they escape the Biodome in record time. The press considers the Biodome a success, and then it just shows Walter Peck looking like a crazed homeless person running off into the desert.
Hey, you guys seen Faulkner? No sign of him over here. How could he have gotten out? He's not here. I don't see him. Check over in the lagoon. He's not here. Check the grasses over here. Hey, he must have gone through the back door. Where'd he get the key?
Oh, and there's also a sequel bait where it shows them driving into a power plant area. So I'm assuming that if this movie did well at the box office, then MGM probably would have pressured them to make Biodome 2 Electric Boogaloo. Oh, even better. It would be Biodome 2 Bud and Doyle Ride Again.
I think Mother Nature's calling me again right now, squirrel.
Can you cork it?
Negatory.
What? There's no place to go out here.
Hey, what about that factory?
Now, I heard that this movie was bad, and sure enough, yeah, it's not a very good movie. Didn't really laugh, didn't really chuckle, just every so often there would be something that was just so dumb, it caught me off guard, and I actually just went, that's about it. Like, there's one part where they're annoying Walter Peck by singing the Spider-Man theme, but they sing it as Iron Man.
Iron Man does whatever an iron can. Peck is
Hold it! That's Spider-Man. Black Sabbath did Iron Man.
Not even like it's a really funny joke or anything, but it's just like, all right, well, everything up to this point wasn't that great, so I guess I was just kind of looking for things to laugh at. I think the difference between something like this and something like, say, I don't know, Bill and Ted, Beavis and Butthead, Wayne's World, like, because there's a bunch of movies that are like this, and this movie is clearly trying to ride on the success of stuff like that. The reason that those movies work is because they had charm to them. Like, Bill and Ted was very charming, just based on the fact that you have two dumb yet good-natured teenagers traveling around space and time, or, you know, going up against evil robots from the future, or befriending aliens, or the Grim Reaper, and, you know, that they end up in heaven and hell, and, you know, they have to try and get back to the world of the living. You know, it's very interesting to have these really out there concepts, and yet these two dumb kids just kind of laugh it all off and just, you know, constantly air guitar to it all. Because Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves had really good chemistry together. Like, that, they made those characters endearing. And Wayne's World at least had self-aware humor all throughout it, so it's like, even when they acknowledge that something is stupid, they actually seem aware that what they're doing is stupid. And with Beavis and Butthead, most of the time, you'd have it that they try to do something that is clearly not a good idea, but they don't think about it in hindsight, and then they get their asses handed to them, and then because they're so stupid, they just laugh it off, just like, well, that was cool. It's one of those movies where it feels like their main idea of comedy is just noise, nonstop noise. Like, they just say things and they just keep it going and going and going and going until, like, yes, in these kind of movies, the other characters are supposed to find them annoying, but that's where the comedy is supposed to come from. It doesn't really work when the audience is also getting annoyed by their stupidity and their obnoxious attitudes. Another thing that was really bugging me about this movie was the fact that it takes place in 1996, and, like, this is the kind of movie where, yeah, it was made in that time period, but it feels like even in the year it came out, it was dated. The way these guys look and the way these guys talk just feels like a bunch of executives going, all right, well, yeah, that's what the kids, I guess, dress like these days. You know, and I guess that's what kids talk like. So, you know, just make these two college students, you know, like, they always walk around, bro, dude, oh, yeah, man. Like, they're so stereotypical 90s. Even Bill and Ted weren't this dated. Bill and Ted are at least dated enough to be, like, a kitschy throwback. Like, the way they dress, especially in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, it's like, all right, yeah, sure. That's kind of a cheesy 90s thing, you know, the flannel shirt and the backwards cap. All right, yeah, fine. Well, when you see the way these guys dress, it's like, you could seriously tell someone that this was a parody of how the 90s was, and I guarantee you they'd probably believe you if they didn't know this was a real movie at first. I personally wouldn't recommend this movie. But, I mean, there are a ton of people out there that say that it's a nostalgic classic to them. I mean, I know a couple of people who are like, oh, yeah, I grew up with it, and I thought it was funny, and I kind of have a soft spot for it. So, I mean, like, that's the thing. If you grew up with this movie and you still like it, that's perfectly fine. I personally didn't care for it, but, and I want to say this right now, this is how I feel about any of the movies that I review. Just because I don't like them doesn't mean you have to as well. If you like these movies, go right ahead. That's perfectly fine. I'm just saying, me personally, this movie was kind of an endurance test. I mean, it's just as soon as they introduce these guys at, like, the 2-minute mark of the movie, and after, like, the first few lines of dialogue they have, I'm just like, oh, I'm in for a fucking treat with this one. So that does it for the Blockbuster videos in April. We have at least 2 or 3 more Blockbuster videos coming next month. Again, gonna try and mix it up, try and do more cheesy action movies, maybe some more bad horror movies. I mean, how many other chances was I gonna get to talk about this thing? It's like, I kept wanting to see it just to see how bad it was, and yeah, finally got to check this one off the bucket list. So hopefully 2 or 3 Blockbuster episodes for next month. Possibly a bad action movie, bad horror movie. Probably another bad live action adaptation of a popular franchise at some point. I mean, I've had my eye on a couple of those. I mean, we've done Garfield and Marmaduke and a couple of other ones, so probably want to go back to that eventually. Yeah, hopefully something like that for next month. We'll see. But until then, guys, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.